"You cannot play that piano." The words were not whispered. They were not private. They landed in the center of the grand ballroom like a challenge wrapped in a smile. A few guests laughed immediately. Others glanced toward the woman standing beside the piano and joined in. The sound spread across the room beneath glittering chandeliers and reflected off polished marble floors. On the top floor of the Reynolds Grand Hotel in downtown Chicago, more than 200 business leaders, investors, and philanthropists had gathered for an exclusive charity gala. Crystal glasses sparkled beneath warm golden light. Servers moved quietly between tables. A black grand piano sat beneath a spotlight near the center of the ballroom, waiting for the evening's featured musician who had been delayed by severe weather. Nathan Reynolds stood near the stage, perfectly dressed in a tailored black tuxedo. At 43, he was one of the most recognizable business leaders in the country. People listened when he spoke. People laughed when he joked. And tonight, they laughed when he pointed toward Maya Johnson. Maya froze for a moment beside the piano. She had been clearing empty glasses from a nearby table when she noticed a fingerprint smudge on the piano's glossy surface. Without thinking, she gently touched a few keys while wiping it clean. Just 3 notes. Soft, barely audible. But Nathan had heard them, so had several guests standing nearby. "Careful," Nathan said with an amused grin. "That instrument costs more than some cars." A few people chuckled. Maya offered a polite smile and returned to her work. But then someone asked if she knew how to play. Before she could answer, Nathan laughed lightly and said the words everyone heard. "You cannot play that piano." The room responded with another wave of laughter. Maya remained silent. She lowered her eyes and adjusted the tray in her hands. To everyone else, she looked exactly like what they expected to see. A waitress. Someone blending into the background of a luxury event. Someone serving the evening rather than shaping it. The guests quickly returned to their conversations. Deals were discussed. Donations were announced. Champagne glasses touched softly together. Yet Maya could still hear the words echoing in her mind. Not because they hurt, because they felt familiar. People had been making assumptions about her for years. Some saw her uniform and decided they knew her story. Others saw her skin color and made their own conclusions. Very few people ever asked questions. Even fewer listened to the answers. Across the ballroom, Nathan continued greeting donors and investors. He barely thought about the exchange anymore. To him, it had been a harmless joke. Passing comment. Nothing important. But sometimes the smallest moments become the ones people remember forever. Maya quietly carried a tray toward the back of the room. As she passed the piano once more, her eyes lingered on the polished black surface. For the briefest second, something changed in her expression. Not anger, not embarrassment, something deeper, a memory, connection. Then it disappeared. She continued walking as if nothing had happened. Around her, the gala carried on beneath the glow of 1,000 lights. Nobody noticed the woman moving through the crowd. Nobody noticed her calm confidence. Nobody noticed the way her eyes had briefly settled on the piano. But before the night was over, every person in that ballroom would remember her name. Most people in the ballroom forgot about the exchange within minutes. Maya Johnson did not. Not because she was offended. She had heard versions of the same assumption her entire life. What stayed with her was how easily everyone had agreed with it. The laughter had come so naturally, as if the answer was obvious, as if talent followed job titles, as if a person wearing a waitress uniform could not possibly have spent years mastering something extraordinary. The gala continued beneath warm golden light. A jazz trio performed quietly near the entrance. Conversations drifted between investment opportunities, charitable foundations, and luxury real estate projects. Waiters moved between tables carrying silver trays. Maya blended back into the flow of the evening, invisible again. Across the ballroom, Nathan Reynolds stood surrounded by donors and executives. He was discussing plans for a new community arts initiative funded through his foundation. The irony would have been amusing to Maya if she had been paying attention. The man who had dismissed her moments earlier was speaking passionately about creating opportunities for undiscovered talent. Yet she did not judge him. She barely knew him. People often revealed only part of themselves in public. The same was true for her. Near the service entrance, Maya placed several empty glasses onto a cart and glanced toward the piano. It sat alone beneath its spotlight, elegant and silent. The scheduled performer was now more than an hour late. Hotel staff whispered about flight delays and canceled connections. Event coordinators checked their phones repeatedly. A few guests had started noticing the problem. The centerpiece of the evening's entertainment was missing. Maya returned to work, but her attention kept drifting toward the instrument. There was something about seeing a piano waiting in silence. Felt unfinished, like a sentence missing its final word. As she crossed the ballroom, an older gentleman seated near the front watched her for a moment. He had noticed the way she looked at the instrument. Not casually. Familiarity lived in that glance. Recognition, respect, the kind musicians often reserve for their craft. He frowned thoughtfully but said nothing. Nearby, guests continued arriving. The room grew louder. Crystal glasses clinked. Laughter echoed beneath the chandeliers. Yet the piano remained untouched. Maya remembered another room many years earlier. Different city, different life. Thousands of seats stretching into darkness beyond bright stage lights. The memory appeared suddenly and vanished just as quickly. She focused on her work. That chapter of her life belonged to the past. Or so she believed. Then an event coordinator hurried across the ballroom and whispered something into Nathan's ear. Nathan's expression changed immediately. Concern replaced confidence. Several board members leaned closer. Questions followed. More phone calls. More whispers. Within minutes, news spread through the room. The featured pianist would not be arriving. A winter storm had grounded every available flight. The evening's headline performance had just disappeared. Guests exchanged disappointed looks. Some began checking their watches. Others discussed leaving early. Nathan stared toward the empty piano beneath the spotlight. The centerpiece of the gala now looked like a problem waiting to happen. And standing only 30 feet away, carrying a silver tray and wearing a simple name tag, was the one person in the room capable of solving it. The problem spread through the ballroom faster than any announcement could have. Guests knew something was wrong. The featured pianist was not coming. Event staff moved quickly but quietly. Coordinators checked schedules. Assistants made phone calls. Every solution seemed to disappear as quickly as it appeared. Nathan Reynolds stood near the stage speaking with organizers, his expression calm but increasingly frustrated. The gala had been planned for months. Donors had traveled across the country to attend. The musical performance was supposed to be the emotional centerpiece of the evening. Without it, the event would end with disappointment. Around the room, conversations began shifting away from philanthropy and toward the missing performer. Some guests considered leaving early. Others gathered near the bar. The energy that had filled the ballroom only an hour earlier was beginning to fade. Then the older gentleman who had been watching Maya Johnson quietly approached Nathan. He was a retired conductor and longtime supporter of the Arts Foundation. His reputation alone commanded respect. Nathan listened as the man spoke softly. At first Nathan looked confused, then amused, then openly skeptical. The conductor glanced across the room toward Maya. Nathan followed his gaze. Maya was arranging glassware near a service station. She had no idea people were discussing her. Nathan laughed, not cruelly, simply with disbelief. "The waitress?" he asked. The conductor nodded. "I have spent 40 years around musicians," he replied. "People reveal themselves in small ways." The way she looked at that piano was not casual. Nathan folded his arms. Looking at a piano and performing in front of 200 guests are very different things. The conductor smiled. "Then ask her." Nathan hesitated. Part of him wanted to dismiss the idea immediately. Another part recognized that he was running out of options. The ballroom needed a solution. The conductor remained surprisingly confident. Finally, Nathan agreed. Together they crossed the room. Several guests noticed and turned to watch. Maya looked up as they approached. "Maya," Nathan said, maintaining a polite smile, "I have an unusual question." She waited. "Our performer is not coming tonight." Maya nodded. She had already heard the rumors. Nathan gestured toward the piano beneath the spotlight. "I am told you may know something about music." Maya immediately understood where the conversation was heading. For a moment she said nothing. The conductor watched her carefully. Nathan expected an awkward laugh. Quick denial. Instead, Maya simply looked toward the piano. The room seemed quieter somehow. "A little," she answered. The conductor smiled. Nathan raised an eyebrow. "A little." Several nearby guests began listening. The circle around them slowly grew. Curiosity spread. Maya could feel it happening. She also recognized the familiar danger of attention. Once people started watching, expectations followed. Nathan glanced toward the stage and then back at her. "Would you be willing to help us?" he asked. Before Maya could answer, someone nearby chuckled. Then another person laughed. The sound reminded everyone of the joke from earlier. Suddenly dozens of eyes were focused on her. Waiting, wondering, expecting, and standing beneath the glow of the chandeliers. With a grand piano waiting across the ballroom, Maya realized that the next choice she made would change the entire evening. Maya Johnson looked at the piano for several long seconds. The ballroom seemed to shrink around her. Conversations softened. Glasses stopped moving. Even the servers passing between tables slowed their pace as word spread through the room. The waitress was being asked to replace the missing performer. Nathan Reynolds waited patiently, though the faint amusement in his eyes remained. He still did not truly believe she could solve his problem. The conductor standing beside him seemed to believe the opposite. Maya finally spoke. "If you need someone to play, I can try." The answer immediately triggered whispers across nearby tables. Some guests smiled politely. Others exchanged skeptical looks. A few chuckled under their breath. The idea felt absurd to them. A luxury gala attended by influential donors was not the place for experimentation. The evening needed a professional. Instead, it appeared they were about to get a volunteer. Nathan glanced around the room and noticed the reactions. He could not entirely blame them. He shared many of the same doubts. Still, he had no better alternative. "All right," he said. "If you are comfortable." Maya nodded once. No speech. No explanation. No attempt to impress anyone. She simply set her tray onto a nearby service cart and walked toward the stage. The sound of her footsteps echoed softly across the polished floor. Every step seemed to pull more attention toward her. Guests turned in their chairs. Conversations disappeared entirely. The piano waited beneath the spotlight like a silent challenge. Maya reached it and paused beside the bench. For a moment she rested one hand against the smooth black surface. Her expression softened. Not with nervousness, with familiarity. The gesture looked less like someone meeting an instrument and more like someone greeting an old friend. Nathan noticed. So did the conductor. Maya slowly sat down. The ballroom became completely silent. 200 people watched her place her hands above the keys. Several guests leaned back, expecting an awkward attempt followed by polite applause. Others prepared themselves for embarrassment on her behalf. Nathan folded his arms and observed from the side of the stage. He told himself that even a simple performance would be enough to save the evening. Then Maya lowered her hands. The first note floated into the room. Everything changed. It was only a single note. Soft, clear, perfectly controlled. Yet it carried something impossible to ignore. A second note followed. Then a third. The melody unfolded gently through the ballroom like light spreading across still water. Near the back of the room, a conversation stopped mid-sentence. At the bar, someone lowered a glass without taking a sip. The conductor's eyes widened slightly. Nathan felt his posture straighten. Maya continued playing. Her fingers moved effortlessly across the keyboard. There was no hesitation. No searching. No uncertainty. Every note seemed exactly where it belonged. The ballroom listened. Truly listened. The earlier laughter felt very far away now. Guests who had expected a novelty suddenly found themselves leaning forward. The melody grew richer, more confident, more beautiful, and as the music filled the room beneath the chandeliers, people began realizing they might have misunderstood the woman sitting at the piano. Maya Johnson did not seem to notice the growing astonishment around her. She sat at the piano with the same calm focus she had shown while carrying trays only an hour earlier. Her fingers moved gracefully across the keys, drawing music from the instrument with effortless precision. The melody expanded through the ballroom, rich and expressive, filling every corner of the vast room. Guests who had been preparing polite applause now sat motionless. Conversations had vanished completely. Even the soft sounds of glassware and silverware had disappeared. The only thing anyone could hear was the piano. Nathan Reynolds felt a strange sensation settling over the room. Control was slipping away from expectation. Every assumption people had made about Maya was being challenged one note at a time. The conductor standing nearby no longer looked surprised. He looked validated, as if he had recognized something everyone else had missed. Maya transitioned smoothly into a far more demanding passage. Her hands moved faster. The melody became layered and intricate. Several guests exchanged startled looks. They might not have been musicians, but they knew excellence when they heard it. This was not someone who played occasionally for fun. This was mastery. Near the front row, a donor who regularly attended classical performances at major concert halls slowly shook his head in disbelief. Another guest placed a hand over her mouth. A young music student attending with his family leaned forward so far that his chair nearly tipped. The reaction spread throughout the ballroom. People were no longer listening out of curiosity. They were listening out of admiration. The music rose and fell with extraordinary control. Delicate passages flowed into powerful crescendos. Every phrase carried emotion. Every transition felt intentional. Maya was not simply performing notes. She was telling a story through the instrument. Nathan found himself forgetting about the gala entirely, forgetting about donors, schedules, and speeches. For several minutes, he became just another listener in the audience. That realization unsettled him. Earlier, he had viewed Maya through the narrow lens of her role. Now he was witnessing something impossible to dismiss. The room belonged to her. A final sequence swept through the ballroom with breathtaking confidence. Then came a moment of silence between phrases. The kind of silence that only exists when people are completely absorbed. Nobody moved. Nobody coughed. Nobody reached for a drink. 200 people waited for the next note. Maya delivered it with perfect timing. The conductor closed his eyes briefly. One investor quietly whispered, "My goodness!" Another simply stared. When the piece finally reached its conclusion, the last note lingered beneath the chandeliers before slowly fading into stillness. For a second, nobody reacted. The silence itself became a tribute. Then applause erupted. Not polite applause, not charitable applause, genuine applause, powerful applause. People rose from their seats. Chairs shifted across the ballroom floor. Guests who had barely noticed Maya earlier now stood together in a spontaneous standing ovation. Nathan remained standing near the stage, watching the woman everyone had underestimated. The waitress they had expected to fail had just delivered the most memorable performance of the evening. And as the applause continued to thunder through the ballroom, one question began spreading from table to table. If Maya Johnson was capable of playing like that, then who exactly was she? Maya Johnson rose slowly from the piano bench as the standing ovation continued around her. The applause seemed endless. Guests who had arrived expecting an elegant evening now found themselves witnessing something entirely unexpected. Some remained standing long after the final note had faded. Others exchanged stunned expressions, trying to understand how a woman they had barely noticed an hour earlier had become the center of the entire event. Maya offered a modest smile and stepped away from the piano. She looked almost uncomfortable with the attention. There was no dramatic bow, no attempt to prolong the moment. She simply nodded politely and prepared to return to work. That decision surprised people even more than the performance itself. Most performers would have welcomed the spotlight. Maya seemed ready to leave it behind. The conductor approached her first. His eyes were filled with curiosity rather than surprise now. "How long has it been?" he asked quietly. Maya understood the question immediately. "Several years," she answered. The conductor shook his head in disbelief. "That is impossible." Nearby guests leaned closer. The conversation instantly attracted attention. Nathan Reynolds remained near the stage, listening carefully. He wanted answers too. The conductor studied Maya's face for another moment. Then suddenly his expression changed. Recognition flashed across his features. His eyes widened. "Wait," he said softly. "I know who you are." The room seemed to grow quiet again. Several people turned toward him. The conductor took out his phone and quickly searched for something. After a few seconds, he found it. An old concert photograph appeared on the screen. A younger Maya stood on stage beneath bright lights beside a world-renowned orchestra. The conductor stared at the image and then back at Maya. "You are Maya Johnson." It was not a question. It was a realization. A wave of confusion swept through the crowd. More phones appeared. More searches followed. Guests who moments earlier knew her only as a waitress suddenly began discovering another version of her life. Photos appeared. Concert programs. Reviews. Interviews. One donor looked up from her screen and gasped quietly. Another shook his head in disbelief. Years earlier, Maya had been considered one of the most promising young pianists in the country. Her performances had drawn critical praise. Music magazines had featured her. Prestigious orchestras had invited her to perform. She had been building the kind of career many musicians only dream about. The discovery spread rapidly through the ballroom. Every new search result deepened the mystery. If Maya had reached that level of success, why was she working as a waitress? Nathan felt the question growing heavier with every passing second. Nothing about the situation made sense. Talent of that magnitude usually led to larger stages, not service uniforms. Yet there she stood, calm, humble, unchanged by the sudden attention. A donor finally asked the question everyone wanted answered. "What happened?" The ballroom fell silent once more. Maya looked around the room. Hundreds of eyes watched her. Not with skepticism now, with genuine curiosity. She glanced briefly toward the piano before looking back at the audience. For a moment, the confidence she displayed while performing gave way to something more personal, something quieter, something deeper, and everyone in the room sensed that the real story had not started with the music. The real story was about to begin. For several seconds, Maya Johnson did not answer. The ballroom remained completely silent. Earlier that evening, people had listened to her music. Now they were listening for something far more personal. Maya looked around the room and saw faces filled with curiosity rather than judgment. Investors, donors, executives, musicians, people who had spent their lives chasing success were waiting to hear why someone with extraordinary talent had walked away from it. Maya took a slow breath. "My mother became ill," she said softly. The simplicity of the sentence immediately changed the atmosphere. Several guests lowered their eyes. Others leaned forward. The answer was not dramatic. It did not need to be. Maya explained that her career had been gaining momentum when everything changed. Concert invitations arrived regularly. New opportunities appeared every month. Major orchestras reached out. Critics wrote glowing reviews. The future seemed clear. Then came a phone call that altered everything. Her mother needed care. At first, everyone believed the situation would improve quickly. Doctors were optimistic. Family members remained hopeful. Maya continued performing while helping whenever she could. But months turned into years. Appointments became more frequent. Recovery became more uncertain. Responsibilities grew heavier. Eventually, Maya said quietly, "I had to make a choice." The ballroom listened carefully. No phones moved. No glasis clinked. Even the hotel staff had stopped working to hear her story. Maya explained that every new opportunity required travel. Every performance required time away. Every career milestone pulled her farther from home. Yet her mother needed someone present. someone reliable, someone willing to stay. The music was important, Maya said, but family was more important. A deep silence settled across the room. Nathan Reynolds felt something shift inside him. Earlier that night, he had judged Maya based on a uniform. Now he was hearing the story of someone who had willingly stepped away from the spotlight for a reason few people would question. Maya described taking local jobs to help cover expenses. One temporary position became another, then another. Years passed. Concert halls disappeared from her daily life. The standing ovations stopped. The interviews ended. Yet she never stopped practicing. Some nights she played for an hour. Some nights only a few minutes. But she never completely abandoned the piano. "I told myself I would return someday," she said with a gentle smile. "I just did not know when." The conductor standing nearby shook his head slowly. Not with disappointment, with admiration. Around the ballroom, many people felt the same way. They had entered the evening believing success was measured by recognition, wealth, or influence. Maya had quietly reminded them that some sacrifices carry greater value than public achievements. A donor near the front wiped away a tear. Another guest placed a hand over her heart. Nathan looked toward the piano and then back at Maya. For the first time all evening, he understood that the most impressive thing about her was not the performance. It was the choice she had made years earlier. The applause that followed began softly, then grew stronger. Not for the musician, not for the talent, for the person. And as the sound filled the ballroom once again, Maya realized that people were no longer seeing a waitress or a performer. They were seeing the strength of a daughter who had chosen love over applause. The atmosphere inside the ballroom felt completely different now. Earlier in the evening, Maya Johnson had moved quietly between tables carrying trays and refilling glasses. Guests had looked through her rather than at her. Now those same guests found themselves searching for opportunities to speak with her. The transformation happened naturally. No announcement had been made. No title had changed. Yet the center of attention had shifted entirely. Small groups began forming around Maya as soon as the applause faded. A prominent Arts Foundation director asked about her musical training. A university benefactor wanted to know whether she had ever considered teaching. Several donors requested recommendations for young musicians they sponsored. The questions arrived one after another. Maya answered each politely, thoughtfully, without exaggeration. Her humility impressed people almost as much as her talent. Across the room, Nathan Reynolds watched the conversations unfold. The irony was impossible to ignore. Earlier, guests had gathered around him. They had wanted his attention, his opinions, his introductions. Tonight, many of those same people now stood in line to speak with Maya. There was no resentment in Nathan's expression, only reflection. He understood what everyone else was discovering. Talent commands respect. Character earns admiration. Maya possessed both. Near the stage, the retired conductor introduced Maya to several influential supporters of the arts. Each conversation seemed to create another opportunity, another invitation, another connection. Yet Maya remained exactly the same person she had been at the beginning of the evening. She listened more than she spoke. She thanked people sincerely. She never mentioned her past achievements unless someone specifically asked. That quiet confidence left a lasting impression. One donor eventually laughed and said, "You realize half the room is talking about you now." Maya smiled softly. That was definitely not the plan. The response generated warm laughter from everyone nearby. It also revealed something important. She had not walked onto the stage seeking recognition. She had simply helped when the evening needed help. The authenticity of that fact made people respect her even more. Throughout the ballroom, conversations shifted away from business deals and investment opportunities. Guests discussed Maya's performance, her story, her sacrifice, her resilience. People who had arrived expecting an elegant social event were leaving with something much more meaningful. They had been reminded that extraordinary ability often exists in places society overlooks. Nathan slowly crossed the room, greeting guests along the way. As he listened to their conversations, he noticed a pattern. Nobody was talking about the missing performer anymore. Nobody was discussing the problem that had threatened the gala. They were discussing Maya, the woman who had quietly stepped forward when no one else could. The woman many people had underestimated. The woman who had transformed an evening of disappointment into an evening nobody would forget. Looking around the ballroom, Nathan realized the event had become far more successful than he originally planned. Not because everything went perfectly, because something genuine had happened. The spotlight that once seemed reserved for status and influence now belonged to someone who had earned it through talent, humility, and heart. And as guests continued gathering around Maya Johnson beneath the glow of the chandeliers, one truth became impossible to ignore. The most important person in the room was no longer the billionaire who hosted the gala. It was the waitress who had changed it. As the evening moved toward its conclusion, the ballroom remained filled with a kind of energy nobody had expected when the gala began. Guests who had planned to leave hours earlier were still standing in small groups, talking about Maya Johnson. The piano sat quietly beneath its spotlight once again, but now it seemed less like a piece of furniture and more like a witness. It had revealed something important. Nathan Reynolds watched the room carefully. Throughout his career, he had attended hundreds of events. He had seen successful fundraisers, memorable speeches, and impressive performances. Yet this felt different. The impact had nothing to do with publicity or prestige. It came from authenticity. Eventually, Nathan stepped toward the center of the ballroom and gently tapped a glass for attention. Conversations slowly faded. Guests turned toward him. Maya stood nearby, expecting perhaps a closing thank you or final announcement. Instead, Nathan looked directly at her. For a moment, he seemed to search for the right words. Then he spoke. "Earlier tonight, I made an assumption." The room became silent. Nathan smiled slightly. "Actually, I made several." A few guests laughed softly. Nathan continued. "I saw a uniform and believed I understood the person wearing it. I heard a few notes and thought I knew what came next. I was wrong." The honesty of the statement surprised many people. Nathan was not known for public admissions of error. Yet his voice carried no hesitation. "Maya, I owe you an apology." Every eye in the ballroom shifted toward her. Nathan continued. "Not because you proved me wrong, because I should have known better than to judge someone before learning their story." The silence that followed felt warm rather than uncomfortable. Maya smiled gently. There was no bitterness in her expression, no desire for vindication, only understanding. Nathan then reached into his jacket and removed a small folder. "My foundation supports young artists across the country," he said. "Tonight reminded me why that mission matters." He turned toward Maya. "If you choose, I would like to offer full support for your return to professional performance. Concert opportunities, resources, anything you need. No obligations. No conditions. Just support." A quiet murmur spread through the room. Several guests immediately began applauding. Others joined them. Within seconds, the ballroom filled with applause once more. Maya looked genuinely surprised. She glanced around the room and saw something she had not expected. Not admiration for her talent, respect for her choices, respect for the years she had spent caring for someone she loved, respect for the person she had become. After a moment, she accepted the folder with both hands. "Thank you," she said softly. "That means more than you know." The applause grew louder. Yet the most meaningful moment arrived afterward. Long after the speeches ended. Long after the final photographs were taken. Long after the guests began leaving. People walked past Maya not because she was a performer or because she had once been famous. They stopped because they wanted to thank her for reminding them of something important. Talent matters. Success matters. Achievement matters. But character matters more. When the final guests departed and the ballroom lights began to dim, Maya looked once more toward the piano. Earlier that night, people had seen a waitress. Then they discovered a musician. But the greatest revelation was neither. They discovered a woman whose strength could not be measured by titles, applause, or recognition. And as Nathan watched her leave beneath the soft glow of the chandeliers, He understood a lesson that would stay with him forever. Wealth can open doors. Status can command attention. But true greatness reveals itself through humility, sacrifice, and grace. Those are things no amount of money can buy.